To round out our discussion of the pre-study and the protocol execution and data collection phases of the clinical research design, I want to just give you an example of a sample protocol. Take a minute or two and just read through this methods section. This is what we would consider a departmental study, not necessarily a clinical trial. And departmental is often used as a term to represent what would be maybe an investigator-initiated study. It's not connected to a sponsor per se, may not even be a study drug involved. Maybe there are just surveys involved. So I'll give you a minute to look over these methods. So you're probably noticing some acronyms used here that you may or may not be familiar with, so I'm going to clear those up quickly for you so you may know what we're talking about. QOC represents quality of care. SLE is lupus, systemic lupus erythematosus. And there's going to be some, looks like some surveys that, certain lupus patients will be exposed to in this study, particularly to measure, as it says here, some disease-specific measures, okay? And these are going to be some forms. Lupus Pro and ND-HAC are assessment forms that are commonly filled out by rheumatologists for lupus patients. There may be some measure of disease activity and damage with some additional assessment forms, one called Mexican SLEDAI and SLIC, which is the damage index. And there are also going to be some healthcare utilization or some medical history items that are going to be recorded. How many times a patient has visited the rheumatologist, their primary care doctor, other specialists, how many times they've been to the ER, etc. So this is just a snapshot of what the study methods are for this particular study. And there are also going to be some surveys that the study participants are going to do. So a couple questions to engage you as we apply what we have learned in the pre-study and protocol execution phase. Can you anticipate which one of these items that we've mentioned here, that I briefly mentioned in explaining this methods, which one of those items do you think count as case report forms? Or what other kind of case report forms do you anticipate will be necessary to capture some of the data that has been described in this method section? I'll just give it a few seconds and then I'll give the answer to you. Okay, so hopefully you thought that there would be some case report forms that would capture this survey, this self-report data from our lupus patients that are going to be participating in this study. So whatever surveys are going to be used to capture that patient self-report, those will count as case report forms. The assessment documents are also considered case report forms. Those are going to capture those specific disease-specific parameters that are studied. So there would be a Lupus Pro form, an ND-HAC form, a SLEDAI, and a SLIC damage index form, okay? And because there's some data that the investigator wants to capture in regards to what healthcare a patient utilized, like how many times they went to a rheumatologist, a PCP, there would need to be a case report form that would list all of these potential healthcare groups or doctors that any of the study participants may visit, and also some way that the form will capture not only where they went, but how many times they visited each office. So that's the kind of thing that maybe a study coordinator or a PI may need to continue to think about even when they get a clinical trial protocol. When they list all of these different data points or these different forms or assessments that need to be done, those are going to then dictate what your case reports are going to look like. So if that dictates what your CRFs are going to look like, what other source documents may be necessary for this study. Okay? And so that CRF, so the data that needs to be collected, really drives the case report forms that are necessary to collect that information, and then that drives what the source documentation will look like, and often how source documentation will be created. Will you capture the healthcare utilization by just referring to the patient's medical chart and printing off relevant visits from the rheumatologist, the primary care physician? Or is it just sufficient to create a form in which you just list those particular visits that occurred? So I just wanted to give you a quick scenario and a quick example to get your mind creatively thinking about how this data is necessarily documented, how it will be collected, and how it will be consistently collected to truly capture the purpose of the protocol and to truly create consistent data that will be relevant to meeting the standards of not just the protocol but for regulatory purposes. With that, I want to go into our last phase, which is the follow-up and study closeout phase. So depending on the protocol, you are going to be collecting data and documenting the data and reviewing that data and addressing any queries that arise for the length of that particular protocol, be it a month, 6 months, a year, or multiple years. Eventually, the study participant will complete that specific sequence or schedule of events, and once every study participant is complete, you will be able to then close out the study. So after a participant is initiated, they're going to go into what we call maybe a follow-up phase, okay? And certain items that are a part of this follow-up and study closeout phase are consistency and complete data collection, which we really alluded to very well in the execution phase of the study. Consistency is key, and that's why building very well thought out case report forms are very, very, very necessary in that data collection and execution phase. You want to consistently collect the data according to the protocol and whatever iteration of the protocol you're in. This is extremely important as auditors and monitors are looking for study personnel to follow the protocol consistently. Okay, if something needs to be changed, say, in your investigator-initiated study, you find that you may not need to include a specific assessment form and you just don't need to use that anymore. Well, that's technically a change to the protocol. And we'll talk about that in our next slide. This is an extreme example of a change that may need to occur with the protocol. Obviously, the study participant is extinguished in the execution of this particular study procedure. So we won't get to that point. But in lighter terms, these small changes, or sometimes maybe more significant changes, are executed formally through an amendment. When a change to the protocol is necessary, amendments can be submitted when, again, changes to the protocol or even study staff are made. Major or minor changes to the study must be submitted to the IRB so they can continue to determine the safety of the study team and its impact on participants. So just remember, a protocol is not static. It does not exist in its first iteration. It may change for safety reasons. It may change for new information. It may change because maybe a portion of the study just doesn't prove to be as effective and is no longer necessary to be performed. And these changes can be made by submitting an amendment to the IRB so that they can continue to approve the method of this protocol's execution. Study teams should also stay on track with routine IRB submissions, which are called continuing reviews. This is an annual review of the study by the IRB for continued approval. And this is regardless of if there is a change to the protocol or a change to study staff. Finally, you want to ensure that you meet your contractual and budget agreements through this follow-up phase as you're following your patients through to the completion of the study. So sites and teams must do their best to meet their recruitment goal within the time agreed upon in the contract. It's important for study teams to keep up with sponsor correspondence and agreements in order to ensure they meet recruitment and study completion milestones. For clinical trials, closeout visits, finally, then are these formal meetings with the site to conclude the study. So study teams must continue to have a relationship with the sponsor throughout the follow-up. This is not only to ensure the safety of study participants, but it's to ensure that if there are any central changes to the study, that the sponsor can communicate those. There's an entire section of, your regulatory documentation that occurs throughout the study in which you want to document just the correspondence that you may have back and forth with the sponsor, because they want to ensure that they can report even to regulatory bodies that they provided you all as a site with information that was relevant to the study throughout the follow-up phase. So all of your patients have completed the study. The site has met their requirements to deliver on not only recruiting, but enrolling and facilitating the study for a number of sponsors, and now they are ready to close the study out. The closeout visit is typically just a one-day visit in which the CRO will visit the site one final time to finalize several areas of the study. The closeout visit allows the CRO to verify the investigator site file, resolve any issues with data entry, consolidate and reconcile any remaining investigational product, and speak with the PI one final time. And as I did with the site initiation visit, I want to highlight some key aspects of the closeout visit. Again, it can be one, and sometimes it can be multiple days, maybe a 2-day visit, depending on how many items need to be reviewed. So you have a high enrolling study, and there are a lot of patient files that need to be rectified even at this closeout visit that may take multiple days. The scheduling of the closeout visit is coordinated by the study coordinator and also the PI. And the CRO in this case prefers to speak to the PI on site, but has the option to contact the PI by phone if time does not permit an in-person interaction. Okay, after the closeout visit, no patient visits can occur after this visit. A site is completely closed when all data is fully reconciled with the electronic data system. So say at the closeout visit there's some subject forms or subject data that the monitor wants to go ahead and verify. After a closeout visit, you can make any necessary responses to queries or data clean that monitor may arise. Again, no patient visits can occur after the closeout, but data query rectification can occur. The site, again, is not fully closed until all of that data is fully reconciled within the electronic data system. So even after your closeout visit, you may not technically be on paper closed out as you are continuing to rectify data and clear up any queries. So again, we've talked in length about 3 phases of clinical research as I separated in this lecture: pre-study phase, protocol execution and data collection phase, and follow-up study closeout phase. We've covered a number of topics under each of those portions. I want to underscore the importance again of data documentation, good data collection methods that are often developed by the sponsor or must be developed internally within a investigator-initiated study team. Good study documentation is just so important to every portion of this process. It really is the personification of the good clinical practices and that regulatory requirement that data is collected cleanly, it's collected in a manner that can be verifiable and really, makes the work of the study team and the sacrifice of the study participant well worth everyone's investment. If we were speaking in person, I haven't taken any questions, but I want to thank you for your time. Refer to the one reference that was made here. in addition to others that were mentioned throughout the study. Thank you.